The first warning wasn't an alarm or a flashing alert, just a minute irregularity in packet sequencing. I was alone in the chilled server room on the 42nd floor of a Chicago high-rise, a sterile space carrying the faint scent of ozone and filtered air. The thermostat never moved from 68 degrees. I liked the cold. It sharpened the edges of thought, or at least numbed the grinding monotony of corporate network audits. Reclined in an ergonomic chair, I watched pale green code slide down a black terminal window. My presence here was meant to be invisible, an outside security contractor brought in to harden internal architecture ahead of the quarterly board review. Most days blurred into automated scans, burnt breakroom coffee, and deliberate indifference to the executive power games happening somewhere above me. Then the data stream faltered. Not enough to trigger a system alert, just a fractional delay. The proxy server on the 39th floor was quietly mirroring outbound traffic to an external address that did not belong. Someone was siphoning executive data. I didn't feel panic. Panic was for people who didn't understand machines. What rose instead was slower, heavier, a dormant engine turning over in my chest after months of idle rotation. The usual apathy receded, replaced by a clean, mechanical focus. I isolated the compromised node. The intrusion rode on credentials assigned to Giovanni Mayers, Senior Director of Operations. But the destination wasn't general financial storage. The packets were targeting the localized drive of Executive Vice President Stella Ryan. I throttled the outbound port just enough to constrict the leak without signaling detection. Then I stood. This wasn't something that could be solved remotely. The physical line from her office needed to be severed cleanly before any automated wipe protocol could engage. It was 6:45 p.m. Most of the executive floor would be empty now. Only cleaning crews and the few senior managers who no longer remembered how to leave work behind. The elevator carried me upward in near silence, a smooth vertical glide into the rarefied quiet of glass walls and dark wood. When the doors opened, the executive suite lay dim and hushed, recessed lighting casting long shadows across thick carpet. Rows of assistant desks stood abandoned, screens dark, chairs tucked in with careful precision. I moved through them, without sound, and stopped at the corner office at the end of the hall. The door was open. Stella Ryan sat behind a wide oak desk, the Chicago skyline spread behind her in a grid of amber and silver lights. She leaned back in a high-back leather chair, one leg crossed over the other. A crisp white blouse lay open at the collar above a sharply cut black skirt. Everything about her environment was deliberate, symmetry, polish, control. I stood in the doorway in a faded gray t-shirt and worn jeans dusted with the residue of server racks. In her office, I looked like a misplaced tool, something functional dropped into a curated display. She glanced up from her laptop. The overhead light caught the fatigue at the corners of her eyes and the tightness in her jaw that lived beneath her professional composure. Recognition softened it. A flicker of tired amusement replaced the mask. "William," she said, her voice low and warm against the sterile quiet of the suite. "What brings the basement ghost upstairs?" I didn't step in yet. I remained where I was, measuring distance and time. The breach was still active. Every second added more of her files to Giovanni's hidden archive, but pulling her abruptly from the workstation could trigger the exploit's failsafe. Control had to come before explanation. "I need access to your terminal," I said. My voice carried no urgency, only certainty. One of her brows lifted slightly. "Right now?" she asked. "I'm finalizing projections for tomorrow's board meeting, the one where Giovanni plans to argue that my division is bleeding capital." "Now," I repeated, and stopped typing. The change in tone was small but absolute. Not louder, not sharper, just immovable. She exhaled, a quiet release of accumulated fatigue, and let the silver pen in her hand drop onto the desk pad. Her gaze shifted fully onto me then, studying rather than greeting. It moved over the plain gray cotton of my shirt, the relaxed set of my shoulders, the stillness I carried into spaces that preferred motion. The tension between us wasn't only digital. It was the friction of incompatible operating systems. She was perpetual velocity, ambition, deadlines, pressure. I was restraint and calculation, optimized for stability rather than speed. I checked my watch. 6:50. I have to leave at 7, I said. I have a date. The word entered the room like an unexpected variable. It wasn't true. At 7, I was scheduled to recalibrate a secondary server cluster across town. But the substitution served a purpose. Time pressure created compliance curves. I wanted to see how she reacted when her control of a situation compressed. She straightened in the chair, uncrossing her legs and leaning forward. Her elbows settled on the desk, fingers interlacing beneath her chin. A slow, almost playful smile formed, evaluative, not flirtatious. "A date," she repeated softly, testing the shape of it. "Is she prettier than I am?" Silence dropped into the office with physical weight. Even the distant city hum seemed to recede. I felt a tightening at the base of my skull, not heat or spark, but the dense gravity of something anchoring. I didn't smile. I didn't deflect. I held her gaze, expression neutral, while reading the signals beneath the banter. Fatigue, competitive reflex, a thin seam of insecurity she would never expose in any room that mattered. Her knee bounced once under the desk, then stilled when she noticed. Her nails tapped the leather armrest in an uneven rhythm. The smile held, but her breathing shortened when Giovanni's name hovered unspoken between us. "She doesn't exist," I said quietly. I let the truth land without ornament. "Step away from the desk, Stella." The use of her first name, stripped of title, hierarchy, and context, shifted something in the room. Her smile faltered, not offended, not resistant, just replaced by a sudden, precise clarity. She recognized the tone. It was the tone of someone who already knew the fault and was in the process of correcting it. She stood without argument, smoothing the line of her skirt once out of habit, and stepped aside. I moved into the space she vacated. The leather chair still held the warmth of her body. I ignored it. I didn't sit. Instead, I leaned over the desk, hands hovering above the keyboard. I never touched the mouse. A sequence of command shortcuts opened hidden directory trees and suppressed processes beneath the visible interface. "What is it?" she asked. Her voice had dropped, lower, tighter, stripped of executive performance. She stood close to my shoulder now, not touching, not intruding, but near enough that I could feel the sudden stillness of her breathing as she watched the screen. "Someone is running a localized packet capture on this machine," I said. My fingers moved in rapid, precise bursts across the keys. "Your personal directory is being mirrored to an external server. Crude zero-day exploit piggybacking on the update service." My personal directory. The words tightened in her throat. "William, my restructuring drafts are there. My internal reviews of Giovanni's team." "I know." My eyes never left the terminal. "That's why I'm killing the port." I entered the final command string and pressed return. The display went black for a fraction of a second, then returned to her spreadsheet. On the network monitor, outbound flow collapsed to 0. I released a short, controlled breath. The hemorrhage had stopped. The wound was still open. "Did they get anything?" she asked quietly. I pulled up the system log and parsed the capture fragments. "Partial blocks," I said. "Encrypted. They'll need hours to reconstruct anything usable." I straightened and turned toward her. "But there's a constraint," I continued. "Because I severed the connection manually, local security policy has triggered a hard lockdown on this terminal." Her expression didn't change yet. She was still processing. "We can't leave," I said. "Neither of us. We have to rebuild the encryption keys here. If we don't, the automated system will purge your drive at midnight." Now the meaning landed. She stared at me. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that we're locked out of the network unless we stay here and fix this. For how long?" "Until it's done." I glanced at the wall clock. "Cancel your plans," I said evenly. "The date is off." She didn't argue. No protest, No executive pushback, no attempt to negotiate around the constraint. She simply held my gaze for a second longer, then nodded once. The movement was small, but something in her shoulders lowered a fraction of an inch as she accepted the new boundary. It was one of the reasons I respected her. She didn't waste energy fighting systems that could not be bent. "Tell me what you need," she said. "Space," I replied, "and no input on this machine until I say." She moved immediately, crossing the office to the low leather sofa near the window. Her laptop came with her, already offline. She settled into the corner cushion, legs folded beneath her, posture still upright out of habit even as fatigue pressed at the edges. I rotated her secondary monitor 90 degrees and pulled it closer. Vertical orientation allowed full visibility of the cascading hexadecimal without scroll interruption. Then I began rebuilding the encryption framework from the lowest registry layer upward. The work was meticulous and slow. Key fragments had to be extracted from volatile memory, validated, reassembled, and reseeded through a fresh cryptographic chain. Any mismatch would trigger the purge routine. There was no automation path left, only manual reconstruction. For a long time, the office held only two sounds: the rapid, staccato rhythm of my mechanical keyboard and the faint whisper of her papers shifting as she edited notes offline. Around 9:30, the atmosphere changed. The sharp edge of breach adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the dull, physical ache of sustained focus. I leaned back slightly and pressed my fingers into the base of my neck. Tension radiated down my spine. I hadn't eaten since midday. "You stopped typing," Stella observed from the sofa. She hadn't looked up yet. The statement was diagnostic, not conversational. "Decryption cycle running," I said. 12 minutes to brute force the hash segment." Silence settled again. Then she closed her laptop. The sound was soft but decisive. She set it on the glass coffee table and stood, stretching her arms overhead. The movement was unguarded, fatigue overriding posture discipline. For a moment, she looked less like an executive and more like someone who had simply worked too long. "I'm ordering food," she said. "Thai or Greek?" "Fast," I said. "I don't care." She nodded once and reached for her phone. While she ordered, I watched the progress bar crawl through its cycle. Each percent represented thousands of permutations tested against the corrupted keyspace. The numbers advanced with indifferent patience. When she finished, she didn't return to the sofa immediately. Instead, she came to the desk and leaned lightly against its edge, arms folded. Not interrupting, not intruding, just present. "You don't talk much," she said. It wasn't criticism, it was observation. "I communicate when necessary," I said. The dryness was still there, but the edge had softened. A faint, tired smile touched her mouth. "And what does necessity say about who did this?" she asked. I turned the vertical monitor toward her. "Look," I said. The screen was dense with data. Layered columns of memory offsets, packet signatures, and reconstructed key fragments scrolled in silent bands of monochrome. To anyone without deep systems experience, it would have been meaningless abstraction. She studied it anyway. Not pretending comprehension, not deferring either, just absorbing the structure, searching for pattern the way she did in financial models or organizational charts. "Walk me through it," she said. I pointed to a cluster of repeating identifiers along the left column. "Here," I said, "these are session markers embedded in the capture stream. Whoever mirrored your directory wasn't scraping randomly. They filtered for specific document classes." She leaned closer, following my finger. "Which classes?" "Personnel evaluations," I said, "restructuring forecasts, compensation tables, and—" I highlighted the final tag. "Executive succession scenarios." Her breathing stopped for half a beat. Those files were the most restricted set she maintained. Even board members saw only fragments. They mapped potential leadership shifts across the next 5 years, who advanced, who stagnated, who exited. If exposed, They would destabilize half the company. Internal actor, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes. I expanded the packet trace and overlaid the routing path. The capture was staged locally, I said, then relayed through an external host to obscure origin. But the staging process used your workstation's trust certificate. That requires physical or privileged proximity. She absorbed that in silence. There was no fear in her expression, only calculation, fast, precise, ruthless. How many candidates? She asked. 3, I said. I opened a small side window listing access logs, correlated with after-hours presence and privilege escalation attempts. 3 employee IDs remained after filtering. She read them. Her face didn't move at first. Then something colder replaced neutrality. That's my strategic operations group, she said. All 3 report directly to Giovanni. I nodded once. The exploit vector also originated from his division's update server, I added. It was repurposed, not authored. They used existing infrastructure. She straightened slowly. So the breach wasn't random espionage. It was internal power play, someone mining her succession models to predict or manipulate leadership shifts. Corporate war conducted in packet captures. When this finishes, she said, I want copies of everything you've recovered, quietly. You'll have them. And William, she said. I looked up. Her gaze was steady, the executive mask fully reassembled now, but with a new layer beneath it. Not panic, not anger, something more dangerous. Decision. This stays between us, she said, for now. Yes, I said. We held each other's eyes for a moment. Then a knock sounded at the office door. The food had arrived. The knock came again, softer this time. She moved first. By the time I stood, she had already crossed the office, opened the door a narrow span, and accepted the delivery bags with a brief, neutral thank you. The hallway beyond remained unseen. She closed the door immediately with her foot and engaged the lock. Containment restored. She carried the bags to the coffee table and began unpacking with efficient precision. Containers aligned, lids loosened to vent steam, napkins unfolded and placed at measured angles. The scent of lemongrass and basil filled the room, cutting through the sterile electronics heat. I returned to the desk long enough to confirm the decryption cycle was stable, then stepped away. For the first time since entering her office, I allowed myself to disengage from the terminal. She sat cross-legged on the sofa corner again and gestured once to the space opposite her. 8, she said. It wasn't an invitation. It was operational necessity. I took the seat across from her, back straight, knees angled toward the table. She handed me a container without looking up, muscle memory efficiency from a life of working meals. For several minutes, we ate in silence. Not awkward, not strained, just the quiet of 2 people whose cognitive bandwidth was still partially occupied elsewhere. Halfway through, she set her fork down. When did you realize it was internal? She asked. Immediately, I said. External actors don't filter for succession models. They take everything. She nodded once. That matched her own instinct. And Giovanni, she asked. Direct involvement. Unknown, I said. But his infrastructure enabled it, and his team benefits from your exposure. Her gaze dropped briefly to the table, tracing the condensation ring beneath her water glass. He's been pushing for divisional autonomy, she said. If my projections surfaced, they'd show I intended to consolidate his group under central strategy next year. That's motive, I said. She exhaled slowly. I promoted him, she said, 3 times. There was no self-pity in it, only the quiet acknowledgement of miscalculation. I finished the last of the rice and set the container aside. Trust is a vulnerability surface, I said. You allocate it where expected return exceeds risk. Sometimes the model is wrong. A faint sound escaped her, almost a laugh, but without amusement. You reduce betrayal to portfolio theory, she said. Yes. She studied me across the table. And where am I in your allocation model, William? The question landed without warning. I held her gaze. High-value asset, I said. Currently under attack, worth defending. Something in her expression shifted, small, almost imperceptible. The kind of change that occurs when guarded people recognize sincerity they did not anticipate. She looked away first. Then finish rebuilding my defenses, she said quietly. I stood, already in progress. When I returned to the desk, the office felt smaller. Not physically. Spatially, nothing had changed. Same glass walls, same measured lighting, same ordered surfaces. But the psychological distance between us had narrowed in ways neither of us acknowledged aloud. Behind me, she cleared the containers, stacking them back into the delivery bags with the same neat economy she applied to everything. The soft sounds, plastic lids, folded napkins, the slide of cardboard carried in the otherwise quiet room. I resumed the rebuild. The final encryption chain required reseeding across 3 nested layers: file system index, credential vault, and directory mapping. Each stage had to validate against the recovered fragments before propagation. Progress crept forward in fractional increments. Time passed. Around 11:40, the rhythm in the room changed again. The movements behind me slowed. Paper no longer shifted. The faint glow from the sofa lamp dimmed as she adjusted it downward. When I glanced back briefly, she was no longer upright with a laptop. She sat angled into the sofa corner, shoes off now, legs folded to the side. One arm rested along the back cushion, fingers lightly touching her temple. Her eyes were closed. Not asleep. Just stopped. Fatigue had finally overruled discipline. I turned back to the screen. Another validation cycle completed. Keys propagated. 2 layers secure. The third resisted. A checksum mismatch surfaced in the directory map, minor but lethal. If pushed through, it would trigger purge. I isolated the corrupted segment and began reconstructing it manually from fragment memory. Minutes stretched. Behind me, she shifted. A quiet exhale, longer than breathing, shorter than a sigh. William, she said without opening her eyes. Yes. How much longer? Unknown, I said. 30 minutes if the fragment aligns, 2 hours if it doesn't. Silence. Then softer. I misjudged him. The words came from somewhere deeper than analysis, not executive reflection, personal admission. I didn't turn. Yes, I said. No reassurance, no contradiction, just confirmation of reality. Her hand slid from her temple into her hair, fingers tightening briefly before releasing. I built that team, she said. Every one of them, I thought loyalty followed investment. Loyalty follows incentives, I said. Investment only creates expectation. A long pause. That's a bleak model, she murmured. It's accurate. Another silence settled, heavier now but cleaner, no pretense left in it. After a while she spoke again, eyes still closed. And you, she asked, what do you follow? The question was quiet enough it might have been lost beneath the hum of electronics. I finished reconstructing the fragment block before answering. Integrity of systems, I said, people included. Her eyes opened then. I felt it without looking. The shift of attention, the recalibration that happens when someone hears an answer they didn't expect. Neither of us spoke again. On the screen, the final checksum aligned. The encryption chain locked. Her data was safe. At 2:00 a.m., the final progress bar ticked to 100%. The system confirmed the new encryption keys and sealed the drive into an impenetrable vault. Every stolen packet on Giovanni's server was now inert, useless, and irrecoverable. I ran a secondary script to erase logs on his end, leaving behind only corrupted, meaningless fragments. The office was silent except for the soft hum of servers and the occasional click of a key from my hands. I leaned back, exhausted but alert, eyes still burning from hours at the screen. Stella lay curled on the sofa, jacket draped over her shoulders like a shield against both fatigue and the sterile chill of the room. In the dim monitor glow, stripped of executive armor, she looked impossibly fragile, and yet wholly unbroken. For a moment I paused. The pull in my chest was sudden, sharp, and insistent, a gravity that demanded recognition. I wanted to adjust the jacket across her shoulders to make the gesture of protection tangible. But I didn't. My hands stayed on the keyboard. Focus had priority. Discipline was protection. Hovering would have been indulgence. Staying and ensuring the system was fully secured was defense. Hours of meticulous key reconstruction later, the terminal confirmed stability. She stirred slightly, half awake but unalarmed. I didn't wake her fully. She remained curled, a silent witness to the quiet containment of danger. I checked the system clock. 2:17 a.m. The breach was contained. The data was safe, the threat neutralized. Restraint, I reminded myself, was not punishment. It was strategic protection. When she awoke, there would be no trace of vulnerability for her adversaries to exploit. In the stillness, the weight of the night settled over us, palpable but unspoken. The office no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a temporary sanctuary built from vigilance, precision, and silent understanding. By 6:00 a.m., the office was quiet but charged with the residue of the previous night. I packed my gear in the server room, checking each cable, each terminal, each access log. My temporary badge would expire in 1 hour, marking the official end of my contract. The canvas duffel bag felt heavier than usual as I zipped it shut, the sound loud in the sterile space. "Are you leaving?" Stella's voice came from the doorway. She'd traded heels for flats. The rigid posture of the executive had softened. She looked grounded, relaxed, fully present. "Contract is finished," I said, hefting the bag. "Network is secure." She stepped closer, eyes scanning the rows of blinking servers, the tangle of cables, the cold utilitarian floor. "You didn't stay for the celebration lunch." "Not my scene," I said. She paused a few feet away, pulling a small brushed steel guest access card from her pocket. "I need you to fix one more thing, William." I set the bag down. "What's broken?" The card rested in her palm, signed out for 24 hours and time limited. "My calendar," she said quietly, stripped of corporate artifice. "It's completely disorganized. I have a dinner reservation at 8 tonight and no one to go with." I looked at her, reading the certainty in her eyes. There was no hesitation, no shadow of doubt. She was choosing this. I took the card, fingers brushing hers briefly, a subtle exchange of stability. "I can fix a calendar," I said in the low, controlled tone I reserved for moments when the world could be tuned out. She stepped closer, just enough for me to sense her steadying breath, fingers catching the hem of my sleeve, not pulling, just holding, anchoring. "William," she said, soft but unambiguous, nodding once. I didn't let adrenaline dictate the moment. One hand rested lightly at her waist. I leaned down. The kiss was not hesitant or exploratory. It was a lock sliding into place, a quiet finality that sealed the night's work and left the storm outside. No desperation, no chaos, just recognition. When we parted, her shoulders relaxed for the first time in hours. 8:00, she whispered. "I'll be there," I said. I picked up my bag. The weight felt different now, lighter, resolved. She walked back toward the elevator, steps steady, posture unguarded. The server room was quiet, no longer empty. The guest card remained in my pocket, not a promise, but a plan. A reminder, the anchor in any system is the person who chooses to stay and do the work. The boardroom was electric with quiet tension. I sat in the back row, gray shirt blending into anonymity, a stark contrast to the sea of bespoke suits in navy and charcoal. Officially, I was there to deliver the quarterly network report. Really, I was there to watch the architecture of Giovanni's plan collapse. Stella stood at the head of the long mahogany table, poised, immaculate, radiating the competence that erased the exhaustion of the night before. The fatigue had vanished, replaced by a controlled, almost terrifying precision. She began her presentation with surgical clarity, outlining the financial projections and proposed cuts. Every gesture, every click, conveyed authority. Giovanni Meyers sat mid-table, ambition plastered across his face like cheap cologne, overpowering, brash, expecting the room to bend to him. He waited for the opening. "When Stella proposes cuts to my department," he interrupted, voice dripping faux concern, "I think the board should be aware of potential bias." He opened a manila folder, sliding it toward the center of the table. "I received an anonymous data dump last night. Drafts indicating targeted prejudice against my division and unprofessional remarks about the CEO." A murmur ran through the board members. Even the CEO frowned. Stella didn't flinch. She didn't glance at me. She simply placed her presentation clicker down and spoke, calm, deliberate. "An anonymous data dump, Giovanni. That is a serious allegation. I have the files right here," he said smugly, producing a flash drive and pushing it across the polished surface. "We should decrypt immediately for the board's review." Stella's gaze lifted to meet the CEO's. "I welcome the review. However, William Santos, our independent security contractor, will handle the drive to maintain chain of custody." The CEO nodded. "Proceed." I rose from my seat and walked to the table. Silence fell over the room. The air was taut, waiting. I picked up the flash drive, insignificant in weight, and plugged it into the presentation laptop. The screen mirrored to the projector. I opened the first file. Chaos, a stream of garbled, meaningless alphanumeric strings, corrupted data. Next file, same, corrupted. I ran a diagnostic script, projecting the results for all to see. "This drive contains nothing but shattered hash fragments," I stated. "The data is unreadable, corrupted at the source. Metadata indicates it was illicitly scraped using an unauthorized packet sniffer from an internal node registered to Giovanni Meyers." Silence hit. Tension shifted to lethal. Giovanni's confident smile collapsed, replaced by pale panic. "That's impossible," he stammered. "The script was flawless, someone tampered with it." "Yes," Stella said, voice sharp and cold. "Someone did. I authorized William to perform a localized security audit after detecting your intrusion. You did not receive a whistleblower dump, Giovanni. You attempted corporate espionage, and you failed." She pulled a stack of hard copy documents from her portfolio. "For complete transparency, here is my actual restructuring proposal, based on metrics, not bias." Giovanni searched the room for allies. There were none, only the cold, impartial authority of the board. The CEO pointed firmly. "My office, Giovanni, now." Defeated, he gathered his things. Stella remained at the head of the table, standing tall, unshaken. She didn't gloat. She simply reclaimed her space. Her eyes flicked to me briefly, a micro-expression of acknowledgement. Professional mask intact, but the subtle softening of her features spoke volumes. "We did it," she communicated without words. I nodded once, a nearly imperceptible gesture. By noon, Giovanni was terminated. The board approved Stella's restructuring plan and confirmed her promotion to senior EVP. Corporate machinery ground forward, absorbing the drama and converting it into policy. By 6:00 p.m., the server room was quiet again. The contract was officially complete. Temporary access badge expiring in an hour, I zipped my heavy canvas duffel bag, the sound loud in the stillness. Stella appeared in the doorway, calm and grounded. Heels replaced with flats, rigid posture softened. She looked around my domain, the rows of blinking servers, the tangled cables, the utilitarian floor, with curiosity, not judgment. "Contract is finished," I said. "Network is secure." She stepped closer. "You didn't stay for the celebration lunch." "Not my scene." She hesitated, then held out a small brushed steel guest card. "I need you to fix one more thing, William." I set the bag down. "What's broken?" Her calendar. The card was signed out for 24 hours. "It's a mess. I have a dinner reservation at 8 tonight and no one to go with. I studied her. No hesitation, no uncertainty. She was choosing this. I reached out and took the card. Our fingers brushed, brief, subtle, but enough to pass a quiet, steadying energy. I can fix a calendar, I said, my tone low and controlled, the one I used when the world could be tuned out. She stepped closer, fingers catching the hem of my sleeve, not pulling, just grounding. William, she said softly, nodding once. I didn't act on impulse. One hand rested lightly at her waist. I leaned down. The kiss was deliberate, final, the kind that locks a door against the storm outside. No rush, no chaos, just certainty. Her shoulders relaxed, the tension of the night released. 800, she whispered. I'll be there, I said. I lifted my bag again. The weight felt different, lighter. She walked toward the elevator, steps steady, posture unguarded. The server room was quiet but no longer empty. The guest card stayed in my pocket, not as promise, only plan. A final reminder. The truest anchor when systems fail is the person who stays, who does the work, and who makes the choice to endure. Calm under pressure, clear boundaries, and evidence that holds in daylight. I left the room, the hum of servers fatting behind me. The night's work was done.